Have you ever experienced a kind of spiritual déjà vu? A feeling of profound recognition when reading about a forgotten sect? A feeling that echoes when you encounter a different ancient tradition from 1,000 years before? This is not a coincidence. It is a pattern. For the next minutes, we will prove that these are not separate paths, but a single hidden highway of wisdom. The real question is not if your soul has walked this road before, it is to remember the knowledge you gathered along the way. If you are on a path of spiritual seeking, you have likely felt it. A sense of fractured resonance. You might pick up a book on the Gnostics and feel a profound sense of coming home, a deep and unsettling familiarity with their worldview. Then, months later, you encounter the writings of the Essenes, and that same feeling arises, an echo of the same truth. The official histories tell us these groups are separate, islands of thought disconnected by oceans of time and geography, and yet something inside of you disagrees. This can lead to a feeling of spiritual isolation, a sense that you don't belong to any single path because you feel a kinship with so many. But what if this feeling is not a sign of confusion? What if it is a sign of a deeper perception? Consider this. Ancient wisdom is not a collection of separate artifacts in a museum. It is music. The various traditions we study, the Cathars, the Essenes, the Hermetic schools of Egypt, are like different instruments. One is a cello with a deep and mournful tone. Another is a flute with a voice that is ethereal and pure. On the surface, they produce very different sounds. But a trained musician can listen past the individual notes and hear something remarkable. They are all playing variations of the same underlying melody. They are following a hidden musical scale, a divine harmony that unites them all. This journey we are on together is about training our spiritual ear to hear that universal song. Our brains are wired for this very function. On a biological level, we are pattern recognition machines. We see faces in clouds and connect constellations in the night sky. It is how we learn, how we navigate reality, how we survive. We look for patterns to make sense of the world. Now, what if the soul, the deepest core of our consciousness, operates by the same principle? What if that feeling of resonance is your soul recognizing its own pattern, a fundamental truth that it has encountered before in different forms, in different lives? It is the soul recognizing itself, regardless of the cultural instrument it is being played through. There is a fascinating scientific phenomenon called cymatics that provides a beautiful visual for this idea. When you place sand on a metal plate and vibrate that plate with a specific sound frequency, the sand doesn't just shake randomly. It arranges itself into a stunning, intricate geometric pattern. If you change the frequency, a new, equally beautiful pattern emerges. Think of the core Gnostic truth as a single pure frequency. When that frequency was applied to the culture of medieval France, it created the beautiful, intricate pattern we know as the Cathars. When the same frequency was applied to the desert sands of ancient Judea, it created the pattern of the Essenes. The patterns look different on the surface, just as the sand geometries look different. But they are all expressions of the same underlying vibration, the same source code of truth. The patterns are not the point. The frequency is. To begin our investigation, we must start where this melody was played most recently, and perhaps most tragically. We must travel to the heart of medieval France to listen for a note that the Cathars believed was a fragment of that divine frequency, a single spark of light they called the divine flame. That beautiful, out-of-tune symphony the Cathars heard was the universe itself. To them, the world we experience was not a divine masterpiece, but a flawed creation, a beautiful but tragic echo of a perfect reality that exists elsewhere. They held one of the most radical ideas in spiritual history, that our physical world was not created by the ultimate benevolent source of all things. Instead, it was fashioned by a lesser imperfect architect, an entity they and the Gnostics before them called the Demiurge. To understand their worldview, it helps to use a modern metaphor. Imagine our reality as a stunningly complex simulation, a material matrix. It is beautiful, intricate, and utterly convincing. but it was not built by the true source. It was built by a cosmic artisan, a blind creator who mistook himself for God. This Demiurge is not a figure of pure evil, not a devil in the traditional sense. He is more like an arrogant programmer who created a complex system and then became trapped by his own rules, believing his creation was the entirety of existence. He is the god of this world, the god of form, of law, of matter, but not the god of spirit. So if we are living inside this matrix, what are we? According to the Cathar Code, each of us carries a fragment of the real world within. We are divine sparks of the true God of light, ghost users in the machine. We are splinters of pure consciousness that have been ensnared in this material realm through a grand act of deception, or perhaps a deep cosmic forgetting. This is why so many of us feel a profound sense of alienation, a feeling of not truly belonging here. The Cathars would say this feeling is not a weakness to be overcome. It is the most sane and sacred response to living inside an illusion. It is the divine spark remembering its true home. This was not merely an abstract philosophy. It had radical, dangerous consequences for how they lived and what they believed. At the heart of their heresy was a complete and total rejection of the God described in most of the Old Testament. They read those texts and did not see a benevolent father. They saw the very character profile of their Demiurge, a tribal deity who was jealous and wrathful, who demanded blood sacrifice, who created a world of brutal laws, and who declared his own creation to be good while it was filled with suffering and decay. For the Cathars, this was the architect of the prison, not the father of light. Their true God was entirely different, silent, formless, genderless, existing in a realm of pure spirit, utterly separate from the corruptions of matter. Christ to them was not an emissary of the Demiurge. He was a messenger from the real world, sent to remind us of the code to escape the matrix. This idea of a false reality, and our struggle to awaken from it, is one of the oldest and most persistent currents in human thought. More than 1,000 years before the Cathars, the Greek philosopher Plato gave us the perfect map for this concept in his allegory of the cave. He asked us to imagine prisoners chained in a cave, forced to watch shadows dance on a wall. They believe these shadows are the only reality. But the shadows are cast by puppeteers holding objects in front of a fire. The Gnostic, the mystic, is the prisoner who breaks free from the chains, turns around, and sees the fire and the puppets for what they are, a fabricated reality. He then makes the perilous journey out of the cave entirely and is blinded by the true source of all illumination, the sun. The Cathars simply gave new names to Plato's ancient map. The cave is the material world. The shadows are the limited data from our five senses. The fire is the Demiurge, a source of light, but a false and flickering one. And the brilliant, formless sun outside the cave is the true, unknowable God of light, a reality so total that the Demiurge's fire is but a pale imitation. This conviction that we are living in the Shadowlands and that a greater reality awaits our remembrance was the secret that fueled the Cathars' incredible courage. This idea was dangerous. It undermined every foundation of worldly authority. But the Cathars did not invent it. They were reading from a much older script, one that was carefully preserved for 1,000 years in clay jars, buried beneath the desert sands. The parallels are undeniable. If we trace the Gnostic melody backward from the Cathars, the next clear note is found more than 1,000 years earlier, in the stark and silent deserts of Judea. Here, a community of mystics known as the Essenes withdrew from the world to create a society built entirely around the preservation of this secret knowledge. They were not just precursors to the Cathars, they were the architects of the very blueprint for a Gnostic way of life. Consider the structure of their community at Qumran, a structure that the Cathar perfecti would mirror centuries later. The Essenes practiced a rigorous asceticism, renouncing worldly wealth and pleasure to achieve a state of spiritual purity. They followed a strict hierarchy of initiation, where knowledge was revealed in stages, protecting the deepest secrets from the unready. And most critically, they saw themselves as the one true, incorruptible spiritual lineage in a world that had fallen into darkness and dogma. Does this sound familiar? It is the exact same model, the same social and spiritual DNA that would re-emerge in the mountains of southern France. For centuries, this connection was the subject of speculation. But in 1947, a discovery in the caves near the Dead Sea changed everything. The unearthing of the Dead Sea Scrolls provided the missing link, the textual evidence that moved this theory from possibility to near certainty. Among those ancient scrolls was a text with an unambiguous title: The War of the Sons of Light Against the Sons of Darkness. This wasn't just a piece of theology. It was a manual for a cosmic and earthly battle between the forces of spiritual truth and material corruption. This intense dualism is the very foundation of the Cathar worldview. Here, written on parchment 2,000 years ago, is the undeniable precursor to the Cathars' own cosmic struggle. The Essenes were not just practicing a different form of their parent religion. They were living inside a different spiritual universe, one defined by the very Gnostic principles the Cathars would later champion. And here we touch upon a profound mystical idea, a concept that helps us understand why these groups felt such authority. When asked about their lineage, they did not point to a succession of priests in a temple. They pointed to an entirely different kind of authority, an esoteric priesthood known as the Order of Melchizedek. Melchizedek is a mysterious figure in the Old Testament, a king and a priest who appears without genealogy, blesses Abraham, and then vanishes. For mystics, he represents a spiritual authority that comes directly from Source, not through earthly institutions. The Essenes, and by extension the Cathars, saw themselves as part of this invisible lineage. Their authority came from the direct transmission of Gnosis, a passing of light from soul to soul, entirely outside the corrupted channels of worldly power. The parallels are simply too precise to be a coincidence. The blueprint for a community living outside the matrix, dedicated to preserving the memory of the light, was meticulously drafted by the Essenes. But both groups, the Essenes in their desert monastery and the Cathars in their mountain fortresses, acted as if they were preserving something even older than themselves. They were the guardians of a sacred program. But to find the original operating system on which that program was designed to run, we must travel even further back, to the source of so much of the West's hidden wisdom, to the ancient and mysterious land of Egypt. The Essenes and the Cathars were like beautifully functional programs, designed to preserve and live a sacred truth. But every program runs on an operating system. To find the original spiritual source code for Gnosticism, our investigation must lead us to the banks of the Nile and to the crucible of Hellenistic Egypt. It is here that the intuitive feelings of the mystics were first articulated as a profound and practical philosophy, a body of teachings attributed to a legendary figure known as Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great. To be clear, this is not a speculative leap. It is an anchor in verifiable history. In the centuries following the conquests of Alexander the Great, the city of Alexandria in Egypt became the intellectual and spiritual capital of the world. It was a vibrant, multicultural cauldron of ideas, a place where the mystical traditions of Egyptian religion, the esoteric currents of Jewish thought, and the rational inquiries of Greek Platonic philosophy all met and merged. Historians document that it was in this very melting pot, between the 1st and 3rd centuries, that the first great Gnostic schools were born. They were the natural, inevitable synthesis of these three powerful streams of thought. Within this Alexandrian synthesis, one set of texts became the foundational code for the Gnostic worldview, the Corpus Hermeticum. These writings, presented as a dialogue between a teacher, Hermes, and his students, lay out the core principles that would echo through the centuries. And perhaps the most vital of these principles is the Hermetic understanding of what a human being truly is. The texts teach that we are beings of a dual nature. We have a mortal, physical body, born of the material world and subject to its laws of fate and decay. But within that body, we have an immortal mind, a spirit, which is a direct, unfallen fragment of the divine. Herein lies the key that unlocks the entire Gnostic mystery. The human predicament is not one of sin, but one of amnesia. We are divine beings who have forgotten our divinity, mesmerized by our reflection in the world of matter. The purpose of life, according to the Hermetic source code, is Gnosis, the direct inner knowing of our true spiritual nature. Through this inner knowing, the immortal mind can awaken, remember itself, and ultimately achieve liberation from the chains of the material matrix. It can transcend the destiny written in the stars and reclaim its original state of unity with the divine. Does this not resonate with the deepest paradox of our own existence? The feeling of being infinite, yet trapped in a finite form. The sense that we are more than just our bodies, more than our thoughts, more than our circumstances. The Hermetic teachings gave a voice and a structure to this universal human intuition. We can now see the transmission clearly. The Egyptians articulated the source code. The Essenes built the community blueprint to protect it. The Cathars lived and died for its truth. But even the Hermetic tradition speaks as if it is a rediscovery of something far older. Every great mystery tradition has a founding myth, a story of a long-lost golden age from which all wisdom first originated. In the memory of the Western world, that primordial story has a name that echoes with both wonder and warning. A place called Atlantis. And so we arrive at the source of the river, the name that haunts the dreams of the Western mystical tradition, Atlantis. The story of a great enlightened civilization, a paradise of wisdom and power that was lost to the sea, has captivated seekers for centuries. But in our investigation, we must approach this final piece of the puzzle with both intellectual honesty and deep intuitive respect. The question we must ask is not simply, was Atlantis real? But rather, what is the function of Atlantis in this spiritual lineage? First, let's ground ourselves in what we know. The story of Atlantis comes to us almost exclusively from the writings of the Greek philosopher Plato in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias. Most classical scholars and historians today agree that Plato's account was likely an allegory, a sophisticated political and moral fable. He told the story of this advanced but arrogant civilization that became corrupted by its own power and was ultimately destroyed by the gods, to serve as a cautionary tale for his own Athenian society. So, from a purely historical perspective, the evidence for a physical Atlantis is minimal. But to dismiss Atlantis as just a myth is to miss the deeper, more profound truth. A myth is not a lie. A myth is a story that carries a psychological and spiritual truth too vast to be contained in mere facts. Atlantis serves as the great unifying lost memory for the Western soul. It is the archetypal story of Paradise Lost, a deep and persistent nostalgia for a state of being where humanity lived in harmony with the divine, possessing a wisdom we have since forgotten. From a Gnostic perspective, this is where the story becomes powerfully significant. The myth of Atlantis functions as a perfect symbol for the pleroma, the Gnostic term for the fullness of the Godhead, the perfect, luminous, spiritual reality that existed before the creation of the flawed material world. The story of the Atlantean civilization falling into the sea due to its own corruption is a macrocosmic, civilizational retelling of the story of the individual soul. Each one of us is a spark of that original perfect world, a survivor of that cataclysm who has fallen into the ocean of matter and forgotten our origin. So whether Atlantis was a continent in the Atlantic or a symbol of our own soul's history is, in a way, irrelevant. Its purpose is the same. It is the starting point of the drama. It establishes the core Gnostic idea that we are exiles from a more perfect home. It is the memory of this lost home that fuels our spiritual yearning. It is the reason we feel like strangers in this world. The story of Atlantis provides the context for our entire spiritual quest. It tells us that we are not here to build something new, but to remember something ancient. We are not seeking salvation, but a repatriation. This story of a fall from grace, whether you see it as a literal historical event or a profound psychological symbol of your own soul's journey, is the final, foundational piece of the Gnostic puzzle. It is the memory that gives meaning to all the chapters that follow. It is the beginning of the thread. So we are left not with scattered pieces, but with a coherent blueprint of a single magnificent idea. An idea that reveals itself not in history books, but in the very code of our spiritual DNA. So, what is this harmonic resonance, this pattern you feel beneath the noise of history? What is this strange and persistent feeling of spiritual déjà vu? It is the sound of your own spiritual DNA being activated. It is the part of you that is timeless, recognizing its own story told in different languages. And here is the great revelation, the climax of our investigation. The one Gnostic secret that truly unites all mystics across all ages is not a book, not a building, not an organization. It is a single, indestructible memory encoded within consciousness itself. A memory that contains three fundamental truths. First, that our true origin is in a realm of pure, formless light. Second, that we are living in a temporary state of illusion, a material matrix designed to make us forget our origin. And third, that the path home is not through blind faith or external authority, but through direct inner knowing, through Gnosis. This one idea is the thread, and now we can see how it was woven through time. This one idea is the flame. See how it was passed from hand to hand through the darkness of time. The primordial myth of Atlantis became the first memory of the flame's warmth. Hermetic wisdom then decoded the flame's light, translating its secrets into a philosophy. The Essenes built a sanctuary for the flame, protecting it from the winds of the world. And the Cathars, inheriting that sanctuary, became the martyrs of the flame, choosing to be consumed by fire rather than let it be extinguished. And the modern mystic, you. What is your role in this incredible lineage? Your role is not simply to study this memory. It is to reactivate it, to take this ancient code and make it live again in a world that has nearly forgotten it, a world that is drowning in matter and starved for meaning. So let this be a moment of profound validation for you. That feeling of resonance, that sense of being an outsider, that pull you feel toward these ancient forgotten paths. You are not imagining it. You are remembering. The feeling of coming home you get when you read these texts is real, because you are recognizing the native language of your own soul. You belong to this lineage not by blood, but by resonance. To remember is not a passive act of waiting for a lightning strike of enlightenment. It is an active skill. It is the art of learning to listen again, not with your ears, but with your entire being. So how, in a world filled with constant noise and distraction, do we begin to cultivate this sacred art? We do it by creating a space for the patterns to reveal themselves. We do it by becoming conscious detectives of our own spiritual lives. The most powerful and immediate way to begin this work is with a simple yet profound practice. We call it the Resonance Journal. This is not a diary of your daily events. It is a logbook of your soul's conversation with the universe. All you need is a simple notebook or a notes app on your phone. The tool is not important. The intention is everything. The purpose of this journal is to train your perception to see the connections that are already happening all around you. You are shifting from being a passive observer of so-called coincidences to an active participant in the great dialogue. You are learning to hear the music. The method is simple. Whenever you experience one of those moments of spiritual déjà vu, a strange synchronicity, or a moment of harmonic resonance, you take a moment to make a brief entry, answering 3 simple questions. First, the trigger. What objectively just happened? Describe the external event as clearly as you can. For example, I was thinking about a decision to change careers, and I saw the symbol of the Ouroboros, the snake eating its tail, 3 different times in one afternoon. Or, a phrase from a podcast about ancient philosophy perfectly mirrored a secret fear I was holding in my heart. Second, the inner context. This is the most crucial step. What was your internal state just before the trigger appeared? What question were you living with? What problem were you wrestling with? What feeling was present in your body? For example, Before seeing the symbol, I was feeling trapped in a repetitive cycle in my life. Or, I was feeling afraid and questioning if I had the strength to follow my own path. And third, the resonant message. Without overthinking, without judgment, what is the first intuitive message, feeling, or insight that this connection seems to offer you? Write it down, even if it doesn't seem to make logical sense. For instance, the message feels like it's about cycles, endings, and new beginnings all being one thing. Or, the feeling is one of reassurance, a sense that I am not alone in my struggle. This simple practice, done consistently, will change the way you see reality. It transforms passive observations that you might otherwise dismiss into active, undeniable insights. Over time, your journal becomes a personal map, a sacred text of how the universe speaks directly to you. This is the beginning of validating your own Gnosis. It is the proof that you do not need any external authority to interpret your life for you, because you are already in direct communion with the source of all wisdom. We have followed a secret melody through the corridors of time. We traced its notes from the tragic fires that consumed the Cathars, back to the desert blueprints of the Essenes, and finally to the source code of wisdom that arose from ancient Egypt. And in this journey we have discovered that this sacred knowledge was never truly lost. It was only waiting patiently to be heard again. The Gnostics who lived and died for this truth left us a roadmap. In the Gospel of Thomas, a text recovered from the sands of Nag Hammadi, there is a passage of stunning clarity and urgency. It says, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." This is the final, urgent secret. Gnosis, this inner knowing, is not a passive philosophy for contemplation. It is our primary mechanism for liberation. To bring forth the light, the wisdom, the truth that is already encoded within us is not an option. It is the very purpose of our existence. It is how we save ourselves from the amnesia of the material matrix. And so we are left with a new question. The journey of the mystic is not to endlessly ask, "Who am I?" The true question, the one that ignites the path forward, is this: what part of my divine code am I ready to activate now? This conversation is only the beginning. It is a single note in a symphony that is growing louder. In the comments below, share one resonance, one echo, one synchronicity that you have felt in your own life, no matter how small it may have seemed. Let us weave our individual threads together and show the world how truly alive this ancient melody is.